everybody, welcome back. This is HiFi Huff. I'm Steve Huff, and today I have a super cool, pretty remarkable integrated amp for you guys, but just recently, and this is all tube, but just recently I reviewed the Cayin SOUL, and I loved it, and I proclaimed it as my favorite tube amp since a decade ago on that Line Magnetic 219. Now today I have an amp in from Cayin, thanks to Larry over at HiEndPalace.com. Thanks so much, Larry. And this one is a single-ended Triode Class A. The SOUL was a Class AB that operated in a high power mode. This one here today uses 805 tubes, classic tubes, 300B tubes, as well as 6S and 7s for the preamp section. Now, I have a lot to say about this amp, and I'm also going to compare it to that Cayin SOUL. Will this 805A from Cayin become my new favorite, or will I still say I like the SOUL better? Well, stay tuned. I'm going to tell you the difference. I'm going to tell you the little things about this 805A that make it so cool. And yeah, let's just get started right now. All right, so before I get started, let's just talk about the specs of the Cayin 805A. This thing puts out 2 times 50 watts, so 50 watts per channel. This is not a mega power amp, but for a set amp, for a Class A amp, this is a heck of a lot of power. Now, some of you might know that tube amps seem to sound more powerful than solid state amps. And also it seems like Class A amps and set amps just have a little more juice in them compared to, say, Class D 50 watts per channel, right? And this amp is no exception. It feels effortless and powerful depending on the speakers you hook up to it. Now, you're not going to want to hook up some 81 dB efficient, 2 ohm speakers. That doesn't exist, but you know what I mean. Now, with the speakers I used it, the Bacardi 50s, the Icon 12s, the Pure Audio Project Duets, no problem. Plenty of power and then some. So 50 watts per channel out of the gate with those big old 805 tubes providing the juice. On the back of the Cayin, you have 3 line-ins. These are RCA only. This is not a balanced amp like most tube amps of this nature. So you have 3 line-ins here. This is not an all-in-one. This is an integrated amplifier with a preamp and an amp power section built in. This can also be used as a power amp only, and I did try it with a preamp. I pulled out my Galleon P75 tubed preamp, and with upgraded RAID tubes in there going into the Cayin, I'm going to talk about that later when we get to the sound characteristics of this amp. Now, this amp also has a headphone output. So say you're a casual to serious headphone listener and you have some decent headphones, this will power them just fine. I am not a big headphone guy. I love to be immersed in the room, right? But some people like that sound stage going into their head. And if you like that and you have some headphones, this does have a built-in headphone amp. I did try it with my Verum headphones and it powered them just fine. Now, with all these tubes up here, the 2 805s, the 2 300Bs, and the 2 6SN7s, these are probably my favorite tubes of all time combined into one amplifier. So right out of the gate, when Larry sent this to me from HiEndPalace.com, he said, I would like you to review this amp and compare it. Tell me what you think about it next to the SOUL, because you guys know I loved that SOUL amp. So when it came and I saw the tube complement, I was blown away because it uses my all-time favorite sets of tubes. So this also comes with a remote control. It's metal, it's nice, just like the one with the Cayin SOUL. They're different ones, but they're both high quality. At the top of this remote, you'll see a button that says NFB. That stands for negative feedback. Now, many tube amps employ negative feedback, and some are proud to say they have no negative feedback. With the 805A from Cayin, you could run it with no feedback, or you could run it with a little bit, that negative 3 dB. Now, when you turn on the amp out of the box, it's already on that negative 3 dB. And the difference between the two, and I listened to both, I did prefer the negative 3 dB because when you add a little bit of negative feedback, sometimes the sound can be more open, more transparent, right? And when you click on the no feedback, it might get a little fatter, a little juicier. Now, in some old tube amps that I reviewed a long time ago, I liked the no negative feedback setting. Now on here, I like the negative 3 dB, but of course it will depend on your speakers, your tastes, your likes, your dislikes. But what's uber cool about it is you could do it on the fly from the remote control from your listening seat, and you will hear the difference right there and then. So this amp with all the tubes, they also have an easy bias method. Now this does not use auto bias. A lot of modern tube amps these days have circuit boards and auto bias features. I personally feel, and don't take this as gospel, it's just my personal feelings, I like doing manual biasing, and I prefer in a nice quality higher end tube amp such as this, I prefer point-to-point wiring when it's done neatly and nicely in the case. And there's no exception here. Cayin really does a good job here at wiring these things up. They are all hand wired point to point. And yeah, it sounds amazing. But going back to the bias, it is a manual bias, but it takes about 1 to 2 minutes to bias the power tubes. And those are the only tubes you have to worry about biasing. After you run the amp for maybe, when you first power it on, let it run for 2-3 hours. Then there's a switch on the top of the amp. You push it up, and there's a meter in the middle, just like on the Soul, that shows you if the tubes are biased. If that meter is going left or right, either way, you just take a little screwdriver and turn the bias knob till that's dead center. It literally takes under a minute, 2 minutes if you're really taking your time. I have noticed personally that manual feedback amps, they tend to sound a little better to me, a little richer, there's something about it. When I hear an auto bias amp, sure, they can sound amazing, and the convenience is super cool because you don't ever have to worry about it. But I do feel there's a tiny, tiny bit of a trade-off in sound. Some of you may never hear it, some of you may. It depends, again, on your system, on your room, on your ears, all of that stuff. Now on the back, there's also protection for the amp in 2 ways. First, we'll start off with the soft start technology. It's not really technology. You see this in a lot of tube amps. When you turn it on, there's like a 20 to 30 second delay. The volume dial will flash. I like that the volume dial has that lit up knob so you know where it is. And after 20 to 30 seconds, you hear the amp click on. Now when it comes on, this 805A, I do hear like a surge of electricity. It's like, and then it starts to fade. And then here it kind of goes into a silence. Now, it's not as dead quiet as the Soul. There's a little bit of, but not even that loud. It's so tiny you have to be up at the amp to hear it. I absolutely do not hear it at all from my listening seat. But anytime I've had an amp with 805 tubes or 845 tubes, these things glow like you're out at 2 in the morning and someone's shining their brights on you. These things can glow. Not that bright, but you know what I mean. Compared to other tubes, these things really have a way of putting on a light show for you, and it looks quite nice in the dark. This amp does get a little bit hot, Class A design, big power tubes. They're going to heat up the room a little bit. This amp does come with a cage, so if you have pets, cats, kids, and you don't want them scalding themselves on these big power tubes because these tubes can burn you once they get hot, you can put the cage on. I prefer, of course, to run it naked, but I never have anything in this room besides either myself or my wife, Debbie. So we're safe from getting burned. In the winter time, this makes a really cool winter amp because it can heat up the room if you have a small room. And I kind of like that here. It doesn't work as good as a heater, but it has a nice little bit of heat coming from it. The Soul, on the other hand, ran cool compared to this. The Soul didn't get hot. I'm going to talk more about the comparison between these two in just a minute, but there are also fuses here at play. So this protects the amp from getting blown, and it's going to blow a fuse before your amp gets blown. So it does come with a spare set of fuses as well. All right, so let's get to the sound of the 805A, because this is where it gets magical. And I will say right out of the gate, depending on the speakers you run with this, the sound does have that super magical, wide open, transparent, super holographic. Now, the Soul can be holographic, but the Soul is Class AB, right? It's more of a standard amplification. And with the Soul, you can choose Triode mode, which is a little sweeter, or you can choose ultra linear, which is more beefy, more powerful. In comparison to the sound of the Soul versus the 805A, the 805A again brings that ultimate transparency, its ultimate holographics. If I had to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 for transparency and holographics, the 805A gets a 9. The Soul might get a 7, right? The 7 is, the Soul is a little thicker in sound. So if you like that bass backbone and that beefy warmth, the Soul will bring that to you. If you like more details floating out in space, that transparency and openness, the 805A will deliver that. But I can see a scenario where if you have bright speakers, the 805A might sound a little bright, but only if you have speakers that sound bright to you already. The speakers I use here, especially my Icon 12s, my Soul speaker, I don't have a soul animal, a spirit animal, I have a spirit speaker, and that's the Icon 12s. These let any amp I hook up to them show me the sound of the amplifier, the sound of the DAC, the sound of the streamer. They can bring warmth and body, or they can bring an ultimate transparency. These speakers are like chameleons, and that's why I love them, because I can pick the sound I like via the amp. And right here with the 805A and the Soul, I have two different kinds of sounds. With heavy metal and rock, I like the Soul because it provides that backbone, that warmth, that bass. When you hear the bass strings, you know, and the drums, they sound really big and bold. Now, they'll sound big and bold with the 805A with rock and metal. It's a little more electric, a little more sizzle at the top end. Now, where the 805A really takes the lead in sound is with vocals. Say you're listening to old jazz standards, right? Say you're listening to Ella Fitzgerald or Billie Holiday or any number of those people, even Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, you know, the Rat Pack. The 805A is pure magic. You hear the vocals so pure. They're not bloated or chesty, which the Soul brings out more of that beef in the voice. The 805A is more clean, more precise, right? So a lot of people in this audio game, you either like that wide open, precise sound, but not when it gets harder, harsher, lean. I'm not talking about that because this amp does not do that. Or you like the fat, warm, kicking sound with backbone. That's how these two amps are. The Soul brings that backbone, that beef, that warmth. The 805A brings the all-out openness. So with vocals, it's not puffing up the vocals here. You hear Frank, you hear Sammy, you hear Dean, just as if they were there talking to you with no exaggeration. And the instruments are lit up, right? And they're kind of energetic, and they come out into the room with more, wow, that sounds amazing. Where the Soul, when those instruments kick in, they're more smoothed out, right? And they're not as aggressive in the jumping out at you. So 805A, cleaner, more precise, more 3D. Soul, warmer, thicker, smoother, still has some 3D and holographics, but not to the extreme level of the 805A. The bass with the Soul is thicker, beefier. The bass with the 805A is cleaner, but just as impactful. You want to hear a drum smack? It's going to sound like a drum smack on the 805A. On the Soul, it's going to sound like boof, a bigger, more impactful drum. So that's the difference we're dealing with. If you have speakers that are neutral to warm, or more lean a little bit warm, the 805A would probably be the amp to go for. If you have speakers that are a little more open themselves and not as warm in the bass, you're going to want to go with the Soul. So Pure Audio Project Duet 15, I like the Soul better. Icon 12s, I preferred the 805A. Bucardi 50s, it was kind of a draw. They both sounded fantastic, but I think the Soul added a little more drive to the Bucardi 50s. and more power, and those speakers are kind of more power hungry compared to the other two I have here. So again, Cayin has really knocked it out of the park. This is one of their newer integrated amps, and just like in the Soul, it looks high quality. It's beautifully made. Cayin is one of the nicest brands to come out of China. They're well known, they're well regarded, they're well liked. Nobody really ever says anything bad about a Cayin amp. That's because they take the time to build them right. The design is exquisite and beautiful, and they offer amps with all kinds of tube complements just, to satisfy your cravings, your taste. Pick which sounds you like the best. Now, someone's going to say, is this amp now your favorite tube amp? It seems like every amp you get is your favorite. And a lot of people say that, but that's not true. I don't call everything I review the best. When it's the best I've heard, that's when I call that out. Icon 12s, best speakers I've ever owned, ever heard, for my tastes. I haven't heard anything yet to best them. Any speaker I've reviewed since then, no, they didn't beat my Icon 12s. The Cayin SOUL, for me and my use, I would pick the Soul right now between the two, and here's why. The Soul runs cooler, so in the summertime, it's not going to heat up my space here like dramatically. It's noise-free 1000%. The 805A has that little bit of electric company sizzle when you get right up to it, but overall, you don't hear it from your seat. I do prefer the sound of the 805A for a lot of the music I listen to. And I listen to all kinds of music. But at the end of the day, for me, the Soul would be my preference because it can drive a lot more speakers with that high power ultralinear mode and the super sweet triode mode. Pick the sound you like for the music you're listening to. But I will say the 805A, I think, has a better overall sound quality. It's more open, more transparent, more airy. Details, instruments float in space, probably better than I've heard in a long, long, long time. There's nothing muddy about this amp. It's clean, it's precise, but yet it still has the body there to satisfy your bass cravings. The bottom end is insane. So beautiful amp all the way around. And again, I want to thank Larry over at hiendpalace.com. He sent me both the Soul and the 805A, and I think we're working out a little deal here where he's going to send me something new every month or two, and maybe I'll start a new series. What did Larry send me this time? And that works out for me because I can provide more content for you. It works out for you because you can see what's new in the mid to high end realm of audio. And I would consider the Soul and the 805 as high end. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this look at the Cayin 805A, as well as a relook at the Soul, two amazing tube integrated amplifiers from Cayin. I have a lot more on the way. Again, in my last video on that carry amp, I talked about medical issues. I'm going to talk more about that soon. There was some serious stuff coming back, but I think we got it all figured out. So smile on my face, more videos to come. I feel better and sharper than ever. So yeah, subscribe, like, comment below. Actually, comment below. What do you like? Do you like Class A, Class AB? Would you buy a tube amp like the 805A, or would you buy something like the Soul? What's your preference? I'll see you guys in the next one. I love you all.